how's everybody doing? I know it's been a couple of days since the video, but we're working on something very exciting for everybody, so hopefully you'll see that soon. But anyway, let's get into what's going on at Baseball Legends Facebook page, this day in baseball history. And a couple posts have been up, so I'm going to do two of them right now, which are the last two. First one basically talks about equipment. Now, this is an interesting topic because most people don't talk about it, to be quite honest, but it's really extremely important in how the game's played, and the evolution of it over the years has obviously changed the game. So basically, this post here talks about one player who came up with ideas to make the game easier, who was Fred Clark. And on this date in 1915, while serving as a player manager of the Pirates, Clark filed for a patent of one of his ideas. So basically, Clark was an outfielder, and back then there were no day games. There were no night games. Everything was played during the day. You're dealing with sun, rising, setting, a lot of shadows, issues with sun being in the player's eyes. So he came up with the idea of flip-down sunglasses. Now, we still to this day, people are using them every single time there is an issue with the sun or shadows. They even use them sometimes when the light of the night games start to give off a weird glare. So this is something that has stood the test of time. Great idea by this gentleman. And another idea that he had was basically the tarp. When it was raining, the tarp they pull out on the infield to preserve it a little bit really changes the game. Because again, if you didn't have that tarp and it rained for 2 hours, you're not playing. I don't care how much diamond dust you put out there, it's not going to help. So that innovation in alone obviously has changed the game. Now, when you watch a major league team pull out the tarp, the grounds crew, who are professionals, make it look so easy. It's out 2 minutes, okay? If you've ever seen anyone else pull out a tarp, it doesn't quite look like that. And college teams have tarps also. Not all of them have groundskeepers to pull them out. So the team does it. And when I was in college, we had to pull out the tarp, and that was a real mess. It was embarrassing, honestly. Not as easy as they make it look. Quite honestly, we still have a player that's missing. He went under the tarp as we were pulling it out. We haven't seen him since. So the way they make it look, it truly is professional. But anyway, big deal there. And then another guy he talks about is Elston Howard, who basically almost, I don't want to say invented, because I'm sure the idea was out there, but he was the first one really to use a donut. Now, if you're not familiar with a donut, think of an actual donut, and it's weighted. So what it does is you slide it over the bottom of the bat, and it fits on the barrel. And you swing it while you're warming up. It makes the bat feel lighter. Some players love it. Some players don't use it. Some players hate it. But if you've ever swung a bat with a donut, after you take the donut off, the bat feels light as a feather. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for actually hitting the ball, not sure. But it does make you feel better. It makes you feel stronger. So a lot of guys use it. Even to this day, they use it. Look at the on-deck circle in baseball. There's 1,000 different things in there at this point. So he was the first one really with that. And basically, the batting glove. This is the third thing he talks about. So Bobby Thompson of the Giants, famous Bobby Thompson, is believed to be the first baseball player to wear batting gloves when he showed up at spring training in 1949 with golf gloves on. Another story is that Ted Williams was the first to wear a golf glove during batting practice in 1953 when manager Fred Corcoran noticed blisters on Williams' hand and pulled out golf gloves for him to use. This obviously is a big revelation in baseball because today everybody uses batting gloves for the most part. They have evolved over time. The real reason for them is obviously to grip the bat and to protect your hands while you're taking batting practice. So it is extremely important because if you've ever taken BP for 20 minutes, do that every day for 2 weeks, you know that your hands start to get chopped up. So either you build calluses, you piss on your own hands like Moises Alou used to do in Jorge Posada, which if you've never heard that story, basically in order to callus their hands, they'd urinate on their hands. And I think a lot of players, this is a Puerto Rican kind of tradition, I guess, and they feel it makes your hands harder. So if you look at them, neither of them wore batting gloves. So you could do that, or you could just wear the batting gloves, which most people probably go with the batting gloves. But that is crucial to keeping people healthy, keeping performance high, gripping the bat in cold weather. That's another thing. Obviously, when it's extremely cold, holding the bat's not a problem, but that feeling you get of the sting when you hit it wrong, that's horrible. But in warm weather also, when it's humid, the bat could easily slip out of your hand. You know, we've seen that happen, unfortunately, too many times. People have been hurt by it. So the batting glove is crucial to baseball. So basically, the last thing he talks about in here is the knee savers, which knee savers are basically pads that strap on to the catcher's shin guards, and they go around the back. So they're like basically almost like create a seat. So as you squat down, your backside will be basically resting on these holders instead of kind of having your knees take all the force and holding yourself up, which obviously has extended players' careers who are catchers, made them able to play more games during a season, and hopefully have saved them some troubles down the road with knee problems. Because squatting and catching, I mean, if you've never done it, it's hard to explain. It's not something that while you're doing it, it's physically grinding, but you feel it after and you feel it the next day. And continually do it really could take a toll on you. And that's why you see catchers generally don't have very long careers. They generally are either one or the other in terms of hitting or catching, just because to become a really great defensive catcher, you got to do a lot of catching. And to be a really great hitter, you got to do a lot of hitting. Now, if your knees are bothering you, your hips are bothering you, your back's bothering you, squatting down and doing catching blocking drills is not something you're probably going to be doing that much. And if you're a big-time bat, you want to preserve your legs. So you're going to catch as little as possible until the game, and you're going to rely on your bat, which, like a Mike Piazza, for instance, where he had the mind of a catcher. He worked with the pitchers very well, but his fundamentals back there as a catcher, you could see, was not something that was worked on constantly, whereas his bat, whole different story. So those are huge issues with that. So what I want to talk about just for a second is catchers used to not even have shin guards at all. So forget about knee savers. So it wasn't until 1907, so basically you had a bunch of baseball before that, when a player wore basically shin guards. But back then it looked more like basically a cricket. And I think it was stolen from the game of cricket, those guards they wear on their legs when they're hitting, because that ball bouncing in there, you know, it's heavy and hard, and if that thing hits you, you're in trouble. So could you imagine catching at any level without shin guards on, with the foul tips? I mean, that is just crazy. But Roger Bresnahan was credited to being the first guy to sport shin guards actually in a game in 1907. So a long time ago, and over the years we've seen the equipment obviously change a lot, but that was the first idea of basically, hey, I'm tired of getting foul balls hit into my shin. That hurts a lot. So that is one thing with the equipment that really just is insane. The other thing is, which happened basically a couple years later, is when Carl Mays hit Roger Chapman and killed him, unfortunately. Now, it was basically an argument over crowding the plate. Mays threw a submarine pitch, hit him in the head. Back then, some guys would have a little bit of protection, like a padded hat, but there was no helmets. There was definitely no helmets like we see today, and it wasn't even required. So he got hit in the head, fractured his skull. He died the next morning. Horrific incident. And that happened, unfortunately, not with a death attached to it, but it happened a bunch of times over the years, and not all of it obviously on the major league level, but getting hit with pitches is part of the game, whether it's intentional or not, and it's extremely dangerous, especially with how hard guys throw even then, but especially today. You get hit with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball in the head, you're probably not gonna make it, honestly, unless you're pretty lucky. So we've seen it happen even with helmets where guys have been very injured. So to think that, hey, they didn't wear anything, that was the definition of tough. Because to stand in the batter's box, especially in eras where throwing at guys was commonplace, it really took something to stand in there, I'm sure. So a lot of credit to those guys. But it wasn't until 1958 or 56, I think, the National League went with the rule where you have to wear something on your head. So the American League followed, or vice versa, in 58. But basically, the end of the 50s is when they're like, all right, you're mandated by baseball now. If you're getting in the batter's box in a game, you have to wear something protecting your head. That didn't mean a helmet like you see today then. That didn't happen until 1971. So basically, you have 50 years of baseball where people were wearing very little to nothing, and most of the time wasn't even mandated to wear it to hit, which is just insane. So now you see the batting helmets. Obviously, they used to have the one flap. Now it's two flap. You see Little League helmets with the cage across the face. Major leaguers, I have never seen one use one. I'm sure one day somebody will probably use it. Maybe if they modify it enough where you could see out of it. But the problem with the cage is it hurts your vision seeing the ball. But safety is really the utmost importance. Again, if something horrible happens, it's not worth any game. So why take the chance? And as a batter, I would want protection even back then. You know, I know it was looked at as kind of not manly, but why take the chance? That would be my opinion. I don't know what my opinion would be if I grew up in the 1920s, but definitely something I think about now that I would like to say I would have had that opinion. The other thing that basically I want to say about equipment is I think the most important thing that's happened in baseball came in the late 80s with basically a Houston sports equipment company. This guy Douglas Davis started making shin guards and elbow pads, and the original idea was for guys who were injured. So, okay, you hurt your elbow, you're able to play though, it's not that bad, but you don't want to take a chance. Here's an elbow pad, here's a shin guard, here's this, here's that. Now you see guys wearing all types of things, but one guy that sticks out is like Barry Bonds, who would have the elbow guard, the shin guard. He looked like he was going into war. And really, it gives the hitters a gigantic advantage because you're not worried about getting hit. There's a huge difference in hitting when you don't have to worry about getting hurt. So you get hit in the elbow, and it doesn't have to hurt. You're able to stay in on the pitch a little longer. You're able to stand a little closer to the plate. The shin pads, fouling balls off, that saves, obviously, injuries. But the elbow pads and the hand things, all that type of stuff, yes, it takes away injury, but it also gives the hitter a big advantage. A big, big advantage. So at some point, you have to make the decision where is safety in the game kind of meet and where does guys start taking advantage of it, start to have to be looked at. Because, again, the fact Barry Bonds could put on armor and go up to hit was really an unfair advantage on top of all of his other unfair advantages. So the pads, the equipment, have changed. It's very interesting if you want to go look at basically baseball history and look at the evolution of the glove, the helmets, the bats. I mean, it is amazing how they used to play. I mean, I look at, like, how did they used to catch with those gloves that were like, looked more like oven mitts than in a baseball glove today. I mean, it's just so impressive. So that's one thing when comparing eras. Like, obviously, baseball legends, that's what the premise is comparing the eras and the players and situations over time. One thing you really got to take into account is, like, the equipment was so bad or so, kind of behind what it would be today, that what if a guy had a bat that was actually weighed the correct weight? What if they had, the maple wood bats when, in the 90s when they were using those things and the ball was getting hammered? What if they had better gloves? What if they had all this stuff? It's an interesting point to look at. So, got the equipment. The next post is an interesting one. It is about fighting and collisions and basically the more violent end of it. So when you think of fights, everybody probably has a couple that come to mind. But baseball is not really known as a physical, violent sport, even though it can be at times. So this post is about that. And a couple of these really interesting scuffles or collisions happened on this day. So in 1976, Lou Piniella of the Yankees barreled towards home plate and collided with Red Sox catcher Carlton Fisk. The collision led to an intense benches-clearing brawl between the bitter rivals in the midst of chaos. Boston's Bill Lee and Yankees' Greg Nettles got into it with one another. Spaceman Bill Lee would suffer a separated shoulder on his throwing arm during the melee. Lee had won 17 games in each of the previous 3 seasons. However, in the 7 seasons since that fight and the separated shoulder, Lee would win just 49 more games before retiring at the age of 35. So clearly, you can't really say 100%, but that fight cost this gentleman a lot of success in baseball. 2006, you had another rival game between the Cubs and the White Sox, and when it got out of hand, when A.J. Pierzynski collided with opposing catcher Michael Barrett. Now, Pierzynski is a catcher, Barrett's a catcher. So the big problem with this back then was, why is a catcher doing that to another catcher? It's like you should know why you shouldn't do that if you are a catcher and how bad it can be. So he gave him a concussion, Barrett, and basically they got into a fist fight. And Barrett, again, never was a great player in his life. Pierzynski was a more prominent player. He was never, a superstar, but A.J. Pierzynski was a very good baseball player. He was just a really opinionated, kind of unlikable guy, quite honest. Everything that guy said, it was just like, did he really say that? He was just one of those guys that wanted to get under people's skin, I feel. And he wanted a lot of attention, and he went about it really in the wrong way. And this is one of those situations that I think just shouldn't have happened. I mean, quite honestly, there's no reason for it. But basically, the thing is, when you're looking at fights, like why did they happen? Most of the time, it's about a batter doing something, either showboating or hitting a home run, and not showboating, but just kind of getting the best of the pitcher, and the pitcher retaliating. That is most of the fights. Basically, the pitcher and the batter have some kind of issue, and the pitcher retaliates by throwing at the batter. Batter charges the mound. There are other fights that are just bad blood between people, and that's an interesting thing to look at. So the question here is, basically, what is the collision or fight that you believe had the biggest impact on a player's career? So I'm going to answer this question a little weirdly, but let's see what everyone had to say about this. Okay, so the first one, one of the most famous ones, as you see here, so Jeremy William Boyden, Pete Rose collision with Ray Fosse in 1970 All-Star Game. Fosse had a noticeable drop-off in production after his separated shoulder in that collision. And then basically, Baseball Legend says one of the most well-known collisions surely had a huge impact on Fosse. Not immediately, though, as 71, he didn't have a huge drop-off. But after 1972, his career was pretty much done. So Fosse was a very good catcher. He was an all-star. He hit 316 with like 20 home runs or 16 home runs one year. And then this happened. Now, in the All-Star Game, that's what makes it so iconic, because people couldn't believe the All-Star Game meant something. But quite honestly, it meant a lot to these guys back then. The National League, American League rivalry really was something that was bitter. Okay, and it's hard to believe now since all the players fraternize and it's like the All-Star Game is what it is. But back then, they really didn't like each other, and it was like a turf war almost. So that was intense and definitely messed up Mr. Fosse's playing career. However, if you want to hear Ray Fosse, he's the Oakland Athletics color commentator today. Well, I think he's still today because he keeps getting demoted to the radio for 20 games, 40 games a season. They're trying to find someone else to replace him. And the poor guy just can't catch a break. But I think one of the issues I saw with him was, in terms of announcing, he really spends way too much time on catcher's defense. And he kind of really badly wants a punch, like a punch line. So he kind of forces the issue of things, and he wants a saying, kind of like a John Sterling, type of guy, where he's just not as good as John Sterling at it. Now, John Sterling, the Yankees radio guy for a million years with Susan Waldman, he could barely see the game at this point. I've been listening to games where he's called it a home run and, it was a foul ball down the third baseline. But when it comes to home run calls, there is nobody like John Sterling. So that's the complaint on Fosse. He's kind of trying to be something he's not. But Roger Downey also says Rose and Fosse, and another Fosse. So Fosse seems to be the general consent of everybody here. And what's he say? No doubt Lee was affected by it. However, he did have one very good season for the Expos. So, where is this? Let me just pull this up here. And basically, with all this stuff, you hope people don't get hurt, but unfortunately, sometimes they do. So, here's another one with Jason Varitek and A-Rod fought. Nobody got hurt there. That was Yankees-Red Sox rivalry back 2003 when Boone hit the home run, and then the Red Sox finally broke the curse in 2004. So that was during this time, and basically they were playing. Bronson Arroyo hit A-Rod, or he threw near A-Rod. I think he hit him, though. I don't remember. And A-Rod didn't like it very much, and Varitek got involved, shoved his glove in A-Rod's face. As you point out here, A-Rod put him in a headlock. I mean, A-Rod's a big man. He's 6'5", 240 probably back then on steroids. So Varitek's no small guy either, but A-Rod's no easy fight, when you're picking one. So that was an interesting situation. Not obviously as impactful as some of the other ones on here, but definitely something that a lot of people remember. So Robin Ventura, I was a big Nolan Ryan fan collecting cards as a kid. Obviously, I was a little too young to appreciate Nolan Ryan as a pitcher besides clips. I was born in 87, but I loved his baseball cards for whatever reason. And this is something that every baseball fan's probably seen, where Robin Ventura on the White Sox charges the mound against Nolan Ryan, who was much older than Ventura at the time. And Nolan Ryan basically put him in a headlock and pummeled his head. It was one of the most lopsided fights you'll see. in a baseball game, because normally a baseball fight consists of player gets thrown at, he charges the mound, catcher's trying to grab him as he's going, slows him down. By the time he gets to the mound to fight, there's 20 other players in there. Then the bench is clear, everyone stands around, and then in there's a couple maybe more, intense fighting, but it's very hard to land a punch with 7,000 people grabbing you, because most people are trying to stop the fight, not, actually fight. So that was one where some damage was actually done and laid, and really just iconic moment, just because Nolan Ryan, he's old at that point, Ventura, who obviously was a very good player, Mets, Yankees, White Sox, Subway Series, he played, with the Mets, third base. He hit the infamous walk-off grand slam single for the Mets, where, basically he hit a home run grand slam to win the game, but they only needed one run, and it was a sacrifice fly situation, so the ball went over the fence. He got to first base, and the Mets mobbed him, so he couldn't round the bases. So probably the only grand slam single that has happened in baseball history, quite honestly. But what comes to mind for me is a lot of things. Number one, Armando Benitez and Tino Martinez, the Yankees Orioles situation, where that was a huge melee. A lot of punches were thrown. That was Strawberry. That was crazy. And again, another Benitez came over and pitched for the Mets as a closer. Really could never handle the big moment. And that was crazy. The other one that was really crazy was Odor and Jose Bautista a couple years ago. I think it was 2016. The year previous to this happening, the Rangers and the Blue Jays played in the playoffs. Bautista hit a huge home run to win the game. And if anyone is familiar with Jose Bautista, the term pimping a home run, basically he defines. So he hit the ball 900 feet. He stood there, flipped his bat, as high as you could go, admired his shot. And the Rangers obviously took exception to that. So the next season they're playing, and Bautista slides into second base. Odor's a second baseman. They're trying to turn the double play. Bautista slides a little late. Not a horrible slide, not something that you'd say, oh, he's trying to be, go out of his way to hurt somebody or make a point. It was just a baseball slide. But from the previous tension, this boiled over. Odor threw the ball wild. He got upset and ended up clocking Jose Bautista with maybe the cleanest and best punch anyone's ever landed in a baseball fight, I would say. I mean, I'd have to really think about that, but he really cracked him. And that was out around second base, which maybe helped because other guys, weren't really expecting it, where when somebody gets hit with a pitch, everyone's on guard, and then the guy charges. The catcher's normally able to grab him a little bit and slow him down. Where second base, it was just the two of them for basically 10 seconds or so till everyone ran over. And that was crazy. Odor got 8-game suspension. Odor has also been, before that, was in fights. So he's obviously has some issues, but that was one that you kind of saw coming at some point. And the real... Well, I'll save that for the end because there's one that just stands out so much to me in terms of fights. But to really answer the question, this has nothing to do with someone's career, but it has to do with everybody's career, quite honestly. So I think this is the most important collision. That was when Scott Cousins ran over Buster Posey of the Giants at home plate and broke Posey's leg, which ended his season at basically 45 games, maybe, somewhere in that range. Now, at the time, Posey, this was 2011, Posey was drafted 5th overall. Posey was seen as the next great catcher. He was up, playing, ready to break out, and then this happens. And it was a horrible injury, snapped his leg. Luckily for Posey, though, he was able to rebound pretty well. And that's the weird thing. Like, sometimes when you break something, it's actually easier to overcome than when you tear a ligament or sprain something, which is technically tearing of the ligaments. Like, it was a clean break, got repaired, and generally that heals, which much less, even though it looks worse and it might seem worse, but it heals a lot easier than some of the other injuries you could get. And Posey the next year hit 336 with 24 home runs and won the MVP. Since then, he's still playing now. He's a 302 career lifetime hitter. Just a great player. 3-time World Series champ, MVP, Gold Glove, 6-time All-Star catcher, and really lived up to the hype, which could have never happened. I mean, if that injury could have easily made Buster Posey irrelevant. And the problem with Posey was he's a great hitter for a catcher, but if you had to put him at first base, it doesn't really translate because his power is not big time. So who knows what happens to Buster Posey's career moving forward. And the Giants franchise, I mean, they won 3 championships with this guy. If Scott Cousins, that basically situation, ended it for Posey. But why this is the most important thing has nothing to do with Buster Posey. It has to do with the rest of baseball. So a couple years later, 2014, the Buster Posey rule was imposed. Basically, that rule stands today, and it changes the game a lot when it comes to home plate situation. Number one, you cannot go out of your way to run into the catcher anymore. So what Pete Rose did, what basically a lot of those situations at home plate, that cannot happen anymore. The catcher also cannot block the plate unless he has the ball. So this obviously avoids a lot of collisions where the catcher's standing there waiting to receive the ball. The player has nowhere to basically slide or, go around, and he just runs through them because there's 2 reasons for that. 1, it interferes with the catcher catching the ball and taking it out. And 2, there's really no other option sometimes. This is a huge rule. So if you don't have the ball, you can't stand in the guy's way at home plate. Big, big deal. Because, again, people are getting concussions, getting hurt. It's happened for so long that it's just not good for baseball. Now, that rule also is interesting because it changes strategy a little bit with the third base coach, where you don't have that element of being able to kind of force something, hitting the catcher and the guy dropping the ball, or maybe, the catcher's personality. He's not really a tough guy, and, the thought of somebody crashing into him when he's not looking and he's trying to catch a baseball might have him rattled. Like all those little things that we don't think about as average fans, but the players and the coaches are, I'm sure, aware of. That goes into a lot of this in terms of using the rules to your advantage or disadvantage. So you can't really use that anymore, and it's just safer. I mean, you don't need to see a star catcher or player get a concussion. You don't need to see someone break their leg. It doesn't help baseball. Is it exciting when somebody smashes into somebody? Absolutely. But it happens every Sunday in football 1,000 different times. One's not more exciting than the other at the end of the day. You don't need to see it in baseball. It's just one of those things that doesn't help the game. I know some old school people are like, well, the guys are sissies now. It's like, no, they're not sissies. We just know more about medicine, and getting a concussion is not worth any of this, because just one concussion could have such an impact on the rest of your life that no amount of money or status or fame is really going to matter. The concussion syndromes and the damage it does to your brain, which again, we're still only in the beginning stages of truly understanding it, it's not worth it. So if we could avoid collisions, let's avoid collisions when they're not part of the game. Now in football, I agree. You can't avoid the collisions. You got to draw the line between where you're changing the game for the worse, like I said before. Where does safety in the game meet and make sense? And then where does it get ridiculous? Like some of the QB protection rules are ridiculous at this point. If you tap his helmet with your finger, it's a foul. Like we have to have some judgment calls in that. But baseball, I think, did a good job of saying, hey, the guy goes out of his way to hit the catcher, he's out. If the catcher's blocking the plate without the ball, runner's safe. Bottom line, there it is. And then obviously it's the umpire's judgment to deem when there is a little bit of contact, was that avoidable or not? And that to basically my memory, has never been an issue so far. So I think that's good, and I think that's the most important thing that's ever happened in terms of a collision or a fight, because it really changed baseball for the better, and hopefully save some guys some agony down the road. But 4 fights, I'm going to end with this most beautiful fight of the reason you shouldn't charge the mound if you're not really a tough guy. Because this is a case of Kyle Farnsworth. Kyle Farnsworth could throw 100 miles an hour. He had a nasty slider. He never had a mind to pitch. He was an enigma for every team he's ever pitched on. Because he should have been the most dominant pitcher, and he'd have a 5 ERA. And it's like, what happened there? But he is a large man. He's an extremely fiery guy. And then you have Paul Wilson, who's a pitcher. And not basically the polar opposite of Kyle Farnsworth. So let's see what happens when Farnsworth lets one. Which, again, Farnsworth just sucked as a pitcher, so I don't really understand Wilson's thought process here. But he threw the ball kind of inside, as you'll see here. Let's play this, and I'll let the announcers take over from here.
Well, first of all, that ball wasn't inside all that much, and Farnsworth doesn't want to throw it to the screen. And then Wilson has something to say about, well, that's going to be okay. It was Wilson that went out to get Farnsworth. Big mistake, as he gets racky-tacked right around home plate.
So, yeah, it can't get better than that. I mean, that's embarrassing for Paul Wilson. Nobody was hurt, besides a couple cuts and bruises. But to get speared like that, like a WWF match after you charge the mound at somebody, is just like the ultimate, embarrassment for a man, woman, child. It just really... Robert Ventura and Nolan Ryan was similar to that, but I think that was more the age thing, and getting put in a headlock and punched in your head is like an older brother, younger brother thing. So I think visually, yeah, that looked bad, but it almost kind of looked like two brothers kind of fighting with each other, where you don't really want to hurt them, but you want to send a message. And now, obviously, Nolan Ryan was probably trying to hurt him by doing that, but it just looked that way. That was just like, I'm going to bury you in the ground right now. And that is why I just find that clip and that situation so interesting to watch even today, because the other one was Bryce Harper throwing his helmet, like that type of stuff. But there's a million of them you could go through. Pick your favorites, but... That's it for today. Like I said, we're working on something very exciting that everybody's going to enjoy. So when we get that done, we'll get that out to you. But have a good day, everybody. See you soon.